The wind howled through the broken window panes of the abandoned gas station, carrying with it the bitter promise of the worst winter Montana had seen in decades. Inside, huddled beneath a threadbare blanket, Sarah Mitchell clutched her four children closer, their small bodies shivering against hers. The last of their food, a stale pack of crackers, had been finished 2 days ago. Her phone had died 3 days before that. And her husband? He had walked out that door 6 weeks ago, taking their car, their savings, and every shred of hope. She had left. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What Sarah didn't know was that 15 miles down that desolate highway, a man who had spent the last 20 years talking only to cattle and his own shadow was about to make a decision that would change 5 lives forever. Sarah's story didn't begin with abandonment. It began with love, or what she thought was love. 3 years earlier, she had been Sarah Daniels, a small-town librarian in Billings with dreams bigger than the Montana sky. When Marcus Mitchell walked into her library that autumn day, his charming smile and promises of adventure swept her off her feet faster than a prairie storm. Marcus was a traveling salesman, he claimed, specializing in agricultural equipment. He painted pictures of a life filled with travel, new experiences, and financial security. Sarah, who had spent her entire 28 years within a 50-mile radius of her birthplace, found his stories intoxicating. When he proposed after just 4 months of whirlwind courtship, she said yes without hesitation. The wedding was small, just Sarah's elderly mother, Margaret, and a handful of friends from the library. Marcus claimed his family lived too far away to attend, somewhere back east, he said vaguely. Sarah didn't question it. She was too caught up in the romance of starting fresh with this mysterious, worldly man who had chosen quiet, bookish her. Their first year together had its challenges, but Sarah attributed them to the normal adjustments of married life. Marcus was often away on business trips, sometimes for weeks at a time. When he was home, he seemed restless, always talking about their next move, their next opportunity. He convinced Sarah to quit her job at the library. They would be traveling together soon, he promised, and she needed to be flexible. The first red flag came when Sarah's mother suffered a mild heart attack. Sarah wanted to stay in Billings to care for her, but Marcus insisted they couldn't delay their plans. He had a big opportunity in Great Falls, he said, and they needed to move immediately. Against her better judgment, Sarah left her mother in the care of neighbors and followed her husband to their new life. Great Falls brought their first child, Emma, born on a snowy February morning that seemed to promise new beginnings. Sarah had never known love like this, the fierce, protective love of a mother. Marcus seemed pleased with fatherhood at first, cooing over Emma and talking about the legacy they were building together, but the business opportunities Marcus had promised never materialized. He grew increasingly agitated, staying out late and coming home smelling of alcohol and cheap perfume. When Sarah confronted him, he became defensive, then angry. The first time he raised his voice at her, she was shocked. The first time he shoved her during an argument, she was devastated. By the time he slapped her across the face while she held 6-month-old Emma, she was trapped. The pattern established itself quickly. Marcus would disappear for days or weeks, claiming business required his travel. During these absences, Sarah would begin to hope that maybe this time would be different when he returned. Maybe this time he would be the man she had fallen in love with. But each return brought more anger, more violence, and more isolation. Sarah's contact with her mother dwindled to brief, supervised phone calls. Marcus monitored her every move, controlling their finances completely. He had convinced her to put everything in his name, their apartment lease, their bank accounts, even Emma's medical insurance. Sarah, who had once been an independent woman with her own career and savings, found herself completely dependent on a man who grew more unstable by the month. When Emma was 18 months old, Sarah discovered she was pregnant again, this time. It was twins Jacob and Joshua. Marcus's reaction was explosive. They couldn't afford 3 children, he raged. How was he supposed to support a family when Sarah contributed nothing? The verbal abuse escalated, and the physical violence became more frequent. The twins were born premature, requiring an extended hospital stay that drained what little savings they had left. Marcus blamed Sarah for the medical bills, for the stress, for ruining his life. It was during this time that Sarah began to suspect Marcus wasn't really a traveling salesman at all. The story he told about his work changed depending on his mood, and she never saw any real evidence of legitimate employment. One evening, while Marcus was passed out drunk on their couch, Sarah went through his wallet. What she found made her blood run cold. There were 3 different driver's licenses, each with Marcus's photo, but different names. Credit cards that didn't match any of the licenses. And a business card for a law firm in Denver with a woman's name, Rebecca Martinez, and a note scrawled on the back, "Remember our agreement. Payment due by the 15th. Sarah's hands shook as she realized the truth. Marcus wasn't just an abusive husband, he was running from something, or someone. And he had dragged her and their children into whatever web of lies and deception he had woven. Before Sarah could fully process this discovery, she found out she was pregnant again. When she told Marcus, his reaction was unlike anything she had experienced before. He didn't yell or hit her. Instead, he went completely silent, staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. That night, he left without a word and didn't return for 3 weeks. During his absence, Sarah dared to hope. Maybe he was gone for good. Maybe she could figure out how to rebuild her life with her 3 children and the baby on the way. She began making tentative plans. Maybe she could contact her mother or reach out to her old friends from the library. But Marcus returned, and this time he brought new rules. Sarah was not to leave the apartment without his permission. She was not to use the phone unless he was present. The children were not to go outside to play. He had installed a deadbolt that locked from the outside, he told her, to keep them safe. Sarah knew it was really to keep them prisoner. Little Grace was born during one of Marcus's longer absences, delivered by Sarah alone in their bathroom while 3-year-old Emma watched the twins. It was a traumatic birth that left Sarah weak and bleeding, but she had no choice but to care for 4 children under the age of 4 while recovering from childbirth. With no medical attention, Marcus's behavior became increasingly erratic after Grace's birth. He would disappear for weeks, then return paranoid and agitated. He started talking about people following him, about needing to keep moving, about how Sarah and the children were holding him back from escaping whatever trouble he was in. The end came suddenly. Sarah woke up one December morning to find Marcus packing his belongings into garbage bags. He was leaving, he announced, and she and the children could figure out their own situation. When Sarah begged him to at least leave them the car or some money, he laughed bitterly. "You think I owe you something?" He snarled. "You've been nothing but dead weight. You and those kids have ruined everything good in my life. I'm done pretending to care about any of you." He took their car, their last $200 in cash, and every piece of identification that might help Sarah access any benefits or assistance. He even took Emma's favorite stuffed rabbit, not out of sentiment, but seemingly just to hurt them one final time. "Don't even think about following me or calling the police," he warned as he headed for the door. "I'll tell them you're an unfit mother who can't take care of her kids. They'll take them away from you so fast your head will spin." And then he was gone, leaving Sarah alone with 4 young children in an apartment she couldn't afford, with no transportation, no money, and winter closing in around them like a trap. The first week after Marcus left, Sarah tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy for the children. She rationed the food they had in the apartment, told 4-year-old Emma that Daddy had gone on a long business trip and tried to figure out her next move. But without identification, without access to their bank accounts, and without a phone, her options were limited. The landlord, Mr. Peterson, came by on the 8th day demanding rent. When Sarah explained her situation, his expression shifted from annoyance to something that made her deeply uncomfortable. "Well," he said, looking her up and down in a way that made her skin crawl, "maybe we can work out some kind of arrangement. You're a young, pretty woman. I'm sure we can figure something out." Sarah slammed the door in his face and double-locked it, her heart pounding. She knew exactly what kind of arrangement he had in mind, and she would rather freeze to death than subject herself or her children to that degradation. Peterson returned the next day with an eviction notice. Sarah had 72 hours to vacate the premises or face legal action. But even as he handed her the paperwork, his eyes lingered on her in that same disturbing way. "The offer still stands," he said quietly. "Just think about what's best for those kids." That night, as Sarah listened to her children's hungry cries, she almost considered it. Almost. But when she looked at Emma's trusting face, at the twins playing with blocks made from empty food containers, at baby Grace sleeping peacefully despite their circumstances, she knew she couldn't sacrifice her dignity and safety. There had to be another way. Sarah spent the next day walking through the neighborhood with Grace strapped to her chest and the other 3 children trailing behind her, looking for help. But it was a rough part of town, and most people barely glanced at the young mother with her children. Those who did notice quickly looked away, not wanting to get involved in someone else's problems. She tried the local church, but the pastor was out of town and wouldn't return for another week. The community center was closed for renovations. The social services office was 30 miles away, and Sarah had no way to get there with 4 small children. As their eviction deadline approached, Sarah made a desperate decision. Late one night, she packed what few belongings they could carry, bundled up her children in every piece of clothing they owned, and slipped out of the apartment. Peterson had been watching the building more frequently, and she couldn't risk another encounter with him. The temperature had dropped below freezing, and Sarah's breath formed white clouds as she carried Grace and herded the older children down the empty street. She had no destination in mind, just away from Peterson and his revolting proposition. They walked for hours, Sarah's feet growing numb in her thin shoes. The children complained of being cold and tired, but Sarah had no choice but to keep moving. When Emma stumbled and fell, scraping her knee on the frozen sidewalk, Sarah finally admitted to herself that her plan was failing. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That's when she spotted the abandoned gas station on the outskirts of town. The building had been closed for years, its windows boarded up and its sign dark. But Sarah noticed that one of the boards covering a side window had come loose, creating an opening just large enough for her and the children to squeeze through. Inside, the building was cold and empty, but it was a shelter. Sarah used the threadbare blanket she had brought to create a nest for the children in what had once been the customer service area. The floor was concrete, but it was dry, and the walls blocked most of the wind. For the first few days, Sarah told herself this was temporary. She would figure out a plan, find resources, get help for her family. But as days turned into weeks, and their food ran out, and the winter grew more brutal, she began to realize that she might have led her children into a trap from which there was no escape. The abandoned gas station became their world. During the day, Sarah would venture out briefly while the children slept, scavenging for food in dumpsters behind restaurants or looking for anything useful in the surrounding area. But the rural location meant there was little to be found, and she never dared go too far from her children. At night, she would hold them close, all 5 of them huddled under their single blanket, and try to convince herself that morning would bring salvation. Emma, wise beyond her 4 years, stopped asking when Daddy was coming back. The twins, Jacob and Joshua, grew quieter each day, their usual toddler energy sapped by hunger and cold. Baby Grace cried less frequently, which worried Sarah more than the crying had. Sarah's own strength was failing. She hadn't eaten a full meal in weeks, giving what little food she found to her children. Her milk had dried up, leaving Grace hungry and fretful. Her clothes hung loose on her shrinking frame, and she could feel her body consuming itself to stay alive. It was during their 6th week in the gas station that Sarah reached her breaking point. Grace had been crying weekly for hours, and Sarah had nothing to give her. Emma had asked with heartbreaking politeness if they could please have some breakfast, and Sarah had no answer. The twins sat listlessly in the corner, too tired even to play. Sarah looked around their makeshift shelter, at the cracked concrete floor, the boarded windows, the single blanket that smelled of desperation and fear, and realized she had failed her children completely. In trying to protect them from one danger, she had led them into something far worse. That afternoon, as snow began to fall outside their broken windows, Sarah made a decision that terrified her. She would have to leave the children and walk to the nearest town to find help. It was dangerous. She might not make it back before dark, or at all, but staying meant watching her babies slowly starve to death. She was preparing to bundle up for the journey when she heard something that made her heart stop. The sound of an engine approaching on the lonely highway. Car doors slamming. Footsteps crunching through the snow. Sarah pulled her children close, her mind racing with possibilities. Had Peterson found them? Had Marcus returned to finish what he started? Were they about to lose even this meager shelter? The footsteps stopped just outside their hiding place. Sarah held her breath, praying that whoever it was would move on, would leave them alone in their misery. Then she heard a voice, deep, gentle, and unmistakably concerned. "Hello, is someone there? I saw smoke from your little fire, and I wanted to make sure everyone's okay." Sarah's heart pounded as she realized this moment would determine whether her children lived or died. She had to make a choice: trust a stranger, or continue down the path that led only to tragedy. The voice came again, patient and kind. "Ma'am, I'm not here to hurt you. My name is Daniel Whitmore. I live on a ranch about 15 miles from here. I just want to help." Sarah looked at her 4 children, Emma with her serious brown eyes, the twins clinging to each other for warmth, baby Grace limping with hunger in her arms, and knew she was out of options. With a shaking voice, she called out, "We're here. Please. We need help." Daniel Whitmore had been driving the same stretch of Highway 287 for 23 years. Every Tuesday, he made the trip from his ranch to town for supplies, feed for his cattle, groceries for himself, and the occasional part for his aging pickup truck. It was a routine as predictable as sunrise, carved into his life by necessity and loneliness. At 51, Daniel was a man shaped by solitude. His weathered hands told stories of decades spent mending fences, birthing calves, and battling Montana's unforgiving elements. His gray-flecked beard framed a face that rarely smiled, not from cruelty, but from lack of practice. The Lazy W Ranch had been his entire world since his father's death 15 years ago, and in all that time he could count on one hand the number of meaningful conversations he'd had with another human being. Daniel's isolation wasn't entirely by choice. He had loved once deeply and completely a woman named Catherine, who had shared his dreams of building a life on the ranch. They had planned to fill the old farmhouse with children's laughter, to create something beautiful together in the vast Montana wilderness. But Catherine had been taken by cancer before those dreams could take root, leaving Daniel with a house full of memories and a heart he'd carefully locked away. The townspeople respected Daniel's privacy. They knew him as a reliable man who paid his bills on time and kept to himself. The cashier at Morrison's feed store would nod politely when he came in. The banker would exchange pleasantries about the weather when Daniel deposited his quarterly cattle sale checks. But real connection, real human warmth, those had died with Catherine. That December Tuesday started like any other. Daniel had finished his morning chores, loaded his truck with empty feed sacks to return to Morrison's, and begun his familiar drive to town. The radio played country music from a station in Billings, and he hummed along absently, his mind already planning the afternoon's work. It was the thin column of smoke that caught his attention first, rising from somewhere behind the abandoned Sinclair station that had been closed since the new highway bypass opened a decade ago. Daniel had driven past that building hundreds of times without giving it a second thought, but smoke meant people, and people behind an abandoned building in the middle of a Montana winter meant trouble. Daniel slowed his truck and pulled into the cracked parking lot of the gas station. The building looked even more desolate up close, windows boarded with weathered plywood, weeds growing through broken asphalt, years of neglect written across every surface. But the smoke was definitely real, a barely visible wisp emerging from somewhere inside the structure. He sat in his truck for a moment, engine idling, debating whether to investigate. Daniel wasn't the kind of man who inserted himself into other people's business, but something about the scene troubled him. Who would be taking shelter in such a place, and why? The decision was made for him when he heard it, the unmistakable cry of a baby, thin and weak but definitely human. Daniel's chest tightened with an emotion he hadn't felt in years. Without further hesitation, he shut off his truck and walked toward the building. "Hello," he called out, his voice rusty from disuse. "Is someone in there? I saw smoke from your little fire, and I wanted to make sure everyone's okay." The silence that followed was heavy with fear and desperation. Daniel could sense the presence of people hiding just beyond the boarded windows, and could almost feel their terror through the walls. "Ma'am, I'm not here to hurt you," he continued, gentling his voice the way he would with a spooked horse. "My name is Daniel Whitmore. I live on a ranch about 15 miles from here. I just want to help." The response, when it came, nearly broke his heart. A woman's voice, shaking with exhaustion and fear. "We're here. Please. We need help." Daniel found the loose board that served as their entrance and carefully moved it aside. What he saw in the dim interior of the abandoned gas station would haunt him for the rest of his life. A young woman, so thin she seemed almost transparent, clutched a tiny baby to her chest. 3 other children huddled around her, a girl who couldn't have been more than 4, and 2 toddler boys who looked at him with eyes far too old for their faces. They were all painfully thin, their clothes inadequate for the bitter cold, their faces hollow with hunger. The woman's dark hair hung limp around her shoulders, and her eyes held the desperate look of a cornered animal. But it was the children who truly shattered Daniel's carefully constructed emotional walls. They clung to their mother with the quiet desperation of young creatures who had learned that the world was not safe. "My God," Daniel whispered, then caught himself. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. My name is Daniel." "What's yours?" "Sarah," the woman replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah Mitchell. These are my children, Emma, Jacob, Joshua, and Grace." Daniel knelt down slowly, making himself less imposing. Emma, the oldest, stepped protectively in front of her younger brothers, her small chin raised in defiance despite her obvious fear. "It's nice to meet you, Emma," Daniel said softly. "You're taking good care of your family, aren't you?" Emma nodded solemnly, and Daniel felt something crack inside his chest. This little girl had been forced to grow up too fast, to carry burdens no child should bear. "Sarah," Daniel said, turning his attention back to the mother, "how long have you been here?" 6 weeks, Sarah admitted, shame coloring her voice. "Maybe 7, I've lost track." The revelation hit Daniel like a physical blow. 7 weeks in this freezing, abandoned building with 4 small children. He looked around the makeshift shelter, taking in the single thin blanket, The small pile of tin cans that had obviously been scavenged from somewhere. The complete absence of adequate supplies for survival. "Have you eaten today?" he asked, though the answer was written in their gaunt faces. Sarah shook her head, unable to meet his eyes. "Not much. The children had some crackers yesterday." Daniel stood up, his mind racing. These people were dying. Not dramatically, not quickly, but slowly and surely starving to death in this frozen tomb. And he was the only person who knew they were here. "I'm going to help you," he said, the words emerging with a certainty that surprised him. "But first, we need to get you somewhere warm. Can you walk?" Sarah struggled to her feet, swaying slightly from weakness. "I think so, but the children... "I'll carry whoever needs it," Daniel assured her. "My truck is right outside. It's warm, and I have some water and snacks." The process of getting the family from the gas station to his truck took nearly 30 minutes. Emma walked on her own, her hand firmly gripped in Daniel's as she navigated the uneven ground. He carried Jacob and Joshua, one in each arm, their small bodies alarmingly light. Sarah managed to walk while carrying baby Grace, though Daniel stayed close in case she stumbled. Inside the truck, with the heater running full blast, the children began to revive slightly. Daniel found a bag of beef jerky in his glove compartment and carefully broke it into small pieces for the twins. Emma accepted her portion with grave politeness, while Sarah initially refused, insisting the food should go to the children. "There's plenty more where that came from," Daniel told her firmly. "You need to eat too." As they drove toward his ranch, Daniel learned pieces of their story. Sarah's voice was halting, filled with shame and fear, but gradually the truth emerged. An abusive husband who had abandoned them. Eviction from their apartment. Weeks of hiding and slowly starving in the abandoned building. "I know how this looks," Sarah said, her voice thick with tears. "I know you must think I'm a terrible mother. What kind of woman lets her children suffer like this?" Daniel glanced at her in the rearview mirror, seeing the way she held baby Grace, the way her eyes constantly checked on the other children. This wasn't a woman who had failed her children. This was a woman who had fought impossible odds to keep them alive. "I think," Daniel said carefully, "that you're a mother who found herself in an impossible situation and did the best she could with what she had. I think you're stronger than you know." The Lazy W Ranch materialized out of the snow like something from a dream. The main house was a sprawling log structure that Daniel's grandfather had built in the 1940s, with additions and improvements made by each generation. Warm light glowed from the windows and smoke rose from the chimney, promising the kind of comfort the Mitchell family had almost forgotten existed. Daniel parked as close to the front door as possible and began the process of getting everyone inside. The warmth of the house hit them like a physical force, and he watched the children's faces transform as they experienced real heat for the first time in weeks. The interior of the house reflected Daniel's bachelor existence, functional but sparse, clean but lacking the touches that made a house a home. Still, to the Mitchell family, it must have seemed like paradise. Emma's eyes went wide as she took in the comfortable furniture, the glowing fireplace, the simple evidence of abundance that surrounded them. "The bathroom is down that hall," Daniel told Sarah, who was looking around with the stunned expression of someone who couldn't quite believe their circumstances had changed. "There are clean towels in the closet. The water gets hot, really hot, so be careful with the children." While Sarah got the children cleaned up, Daniel stood in his kitchen and tried to process what had just happened. In the space of an hour, his carefully ordered, solitary life had been completely disrupted. 4 children and their mother were now under his roof, and he had no idea what he was supposed to do next. The practical part of his mind began making lists. Food he had plenty, but nothing really suitable for small children. Clothes, the kids were wearing rags that barely qualified as clothing. Medical care, they all looked severely malnourished. and the baby in particular seemed worryingly lethargic. But beyond the practical concerns was something deeper, something Daniel hadn't allowed himself to feel in 15 years. These people needed him, not just for a night or a week, but genuinely and completely. And for the first time since Catherine's death, he felt truly necessary to another human being. The sound of running water from the bathroom was followed by the first genuine laughter Daniel had heard from the children. Emma's voice, bright with wonder. "Mama, look how clean the water gets." Daniel found himself smiling, actually smiling for the first time in months. He opened his refrigerator and began planning a meal. Nothing too rich or complicated for stomachs that had been empty for too long, but something warm and nourishing that would begin the process of bringing these people back to health. When the family emerged from their baths, they looked transformed. Clean hair and skin revealed the true extent of their thinness, but also showed glimpses of who they had been before desperation had worn them down. Emma's hair was a rich brown that caught the firelight, and the twins, scrubbed clean, looked like the toddlers they actually were, rather than the miniature adults their circumstances had forced them to become. Sarah had wrapped baby Grace in one of Daniel's clean towels, and the infant seemed more alert, responding to the warmth in her mother's improved spirits. Sarah herself still looked fragile, but the hunted expression had faded from her eyes. "I made some soup," Daniel announced, ladling chicken broth with small pieces of meat and vegetables into bowls. "Nothing fancy, but it should be easy on your stomachs." The family gathered around Daniel's kitchen table, a simple oak piece that had been built by his grandfather and had rarely hosted more than one person in recent years. Watching them eat, seeing the careful way Sarah portioned out the food and made sure each child had enough, Daniel felt something fundamental shift inside him. Emma finished her soup and looked up at Daniel with serious eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Daniel. This is the best soup I ever had." "Just Daniel is fine," he told her, then found himself adding, "And you're very welcome." As the evening progressed, Daniel began to see glimpses of who this family had been before circumstances broke them down. The twins, Joshua and Jacob, gradually began to show typical toddler curiosity, exploring the living room under their mother's watchful eye. Emma revealed herself to be remarkably articulate for her age, asking thoughtful questions about the ranch and the animals. Sarah, fed and warm for the first time in weeks, began to show flashes of the intelligent, capable woman she had been before. Marcus Mitchell had systematically destroyed her confidence and independence. She insisted on helping with dishes, on settling the children for sleep, on contributing in whatever small ways she could. "I can't thank you enough," she told Daniel as they watched the children fall asleep on the living room floor, covered with clean blankets from his linen closet. "I know this is an imposition. We'll be gone in the morning, I promise." Daniel looked at her, really looked, and saw the fear creeping back into her eyes. The fear that this sanctuary was temporary. That morning would bring a return to the nightmare of the abandoned gas station. "Where will you go?" he asked quietly. Sarah's silence was enough. She had no plan, no resources, no options beyond returning to the slow death they had barely escaped. "You don't have to leave," Daniel heard himself say. "Not tomorrow. Not until you're ready, until you have somewhere to go." The words hung in the air between them, carrying implications that neither of them was quite ready to examine. Daniel had just invited 4 strangers to stay in his home indefinitely, disrupting the cozy, solitary life he had built so carefully. Sarah had just been offered salvation by a man she had known for less than 12 hours. "I don't understand," Sarah whispered. "Why would you do this? You don't know us. We could be anyone." Daniel considered her question seriously. Why was he doing this? The practical answer was simple humanity. You didn't let children starve when you had the means to help them. But there was something deeper at work, something he wasn't quite ready to name. "Maybe," he said finally, because for the first time in 15 years, This house feels like it might become a home again." Outside, the Montana wind howled through the darkness, but inside the Lazy W Ranch, 5 people who had lost everything were beginning to discover that sometimes salvation came in the most unexpected forms. Sarah watched her children sleep peacefully for the first time in months, while Daniel sat by the fire and wondered what he had gotten himself into. Neither of them could have imagined that this moment of desperate need meeting unexpected kindness would be the beginning of something that would transform all their lives in ways they couldn't yet comprehend. The lonely cowboy and the desperate mother had found each other at exactly the moment when both needed saving. Though it would take time for them to understand that the rescue was flowing both ways, dawn broke over the Lazy W Ranch with the kind of crystalline clarity that only comes after a Montana snowstorm. Daniel had been awake since 4:30, his internal clock unchanged despite the monumental shift his life had taken the previous day. He moved quietly through his morning routine, checking on the cattle, feeding the horses, and completing the essential chores that kept a ranch running. But this morning was different. Instead of the familiar solitude that had defined his mornings for 2 decades, Daniel found himself listening for sounds from inside the house. The soft murmur of voices, the padding of small feet, the gentle sounds that indicated his unexpected guests were awakening to their first full day of safety. When Daniel returned to the house around 7, he found Emma sitting at the kitchen table, her small hands folded in her lap, waiting with the patience of a child who had learned not to ask for things she might not receive. "Good morning, Emma," Daniel said softly, not wanting to startle her. "How did you sleep?" "Good, thank you," Emma replied with formal politeness. "Mama said I should wait here and not touch anything." The statement revealed so much about their circumstances. Emma had been trained to be invisible, to take up no space, to cause no trouble. Daniel felt anger rise in his chest, not at this serious little girl, but at the circumstances that had taught her such harsh lessons. "Well," Daniel said, opening his refrigerator, "I was hoping someone might help me figure out what to make for breakfast. I'm not used to cooking for so many people, especially people as important as you and your brothers and baby sister." Emma's eyes widened slightly at being called important. "I could help," she offered tentatively. "I know how to crack eggs. Mama taught me." For the next hour, Daniel and Emma worked together preparing breakfast. She was remarkably competent for her age, carefully cracking eggs into a bowl and stirring pancake batter with intense concentration. Daniel found himself charmed by her serious approach to each task, the way she bit her lower lip when focusing, the pride that shone in her eyes when she successfully flipped a pancake. Sarah appeared in the doorway carrying Grace, with Jacob and Joshua trailing sleepily behind her. She had obviously made an effort to tidy herself and the children, but they were still wearing the same inadequate clothes from the day before. "I'm sorry," Sarah began immediately. "I told Emma to wait quietly. I hope she wasn't bothering you." "She's been the best kitchen assistant I've ever had," Daniel replied truthfully. "We've got quite a breakfast ready." Watching the family eat was becoming one of Daniel's unexpected pleasures. The children were still cautious, still eating with the careful attention of people who had learned not to waste food. But there were glimpses of normal childhood behavior emerging. Joshua made airplane noises while feeding Grace small bites of pancake. Jacob giggled when Emma made funny faces at him across the table. Sarah ate slowly, watching her children with the constant vigilance of a mother who had spent weeks unable to provide for them adequately. Daniel noticed she still gave the largest portions to the children, taking barely enough for herself. "There's plenty more," Daniel assured her, refilling her plate despite her protests. "The chickens lay more eggs than I can use, and I've got enough pancake mix to feed half of Montana." After breakfast, Daniel faced the practical realities of his situation. 5 people were now depending on him, and several immediate needs had to be addressed. The children needed appropriate clothing, medical attention, and some kind of legal documentation of their circumstances. Sarah needed to begin the process of rebuilding her life and establishing independence. "I need to go into town today," Daniel told Sarah as she helped clear the breakfast dishes. "There are some things we need to take care of. Would you be comfortable coming with me, or would you prefer to stay here with the children?" Sarah's face went pale. "What kind of things?" Daniel recognized the fear in her voice, the terror of someone who had learned that official attention usually meant more trouble. "Nothing bad," he assured her quickly. "But the children need warmer clothes, and I think it would be good for everyone to see Dr. Martinez in town, just to make sure everyone's healthy after everything you've been through." The mention of a doctor brought a new worry to Sarah's eyes. "I don't have insurance. I don't have any way to pay for medical care." "Don't worry about that right now," Daniel said. "Dr. Martinez is a good man. He'll see the children regardless of payment arrangements." What Daniel didn't mention was that he intended to cover any medical expenses himself. He had lived frugally for years, and his cattle operation was profitable. He could afford to help this family get back on their feet, and he was determined to do so. The trip to town was an adventure for children who had been confined to an abandoned gas station for weeks. Emma pressed her face to the truck window, marveling at the snow-covered landscape, while the twins chattered excitedly about the horses they had glimpsed in Daniel's pastures. Even Grace seemed more alert, her tiny hands reaching toward the sunlight streaming through the windows. Their first stop was Morrison's feed store, where Daniel needed to pick up supplies he had forgotten the day before. Old Pete Morrison, who had run the store for 30 years, looked curiously at Daniel's passengers, but was too polite to ask direct questions. "Nice to see you with some company, Daniel," Pete commented as he loaded feed sacks into the truck bed. "Don't get many families out your way." "No," Daniel agreed simply, offering no explanation. He wasn't ready to discuss his situation with the town's unofficial news network quite yet. Next, they visited Coleman's general store, where Daniel intended to buy clothes for the children. Sarah protested the expense, insisting she would find a way to repay him, but Daniel brushed aside her concerns. "Let's just focus on getting everyone warm and comfortable," he said. "We can worry about everything else later." Watching Sarah select clothes for her children was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. She chose each item with careful consideration, checking price tags and opting for the most practical, durable options rather than anything decorative or fun. Emma stood quietly beside her mother, not asking for anything special, though Daniel noticed her eyes linger on a bright red sweater. "What do you think of this one, Emma?" Daniel asked, holding up the red sweater. "Do you think it would keep you warm?" Emma's face lit up, but she looked uncertainty at her mother. "It's very pretty," she said diplomatically. "I think it would look perfect on you," Daniel said, adding it to their growing pile of purchases. He caught Sarah's eye over Emma's head, seeing gratitude mixed with something that might have been the beginning of trust. Dr. Martinez's office was their final stop, and Daniel was grateful for the physician's gentle, no-nonsense approach. Dr. Martinez had been serving the rural community for over 20 years, and he had seen enough hardship to recognize the signs of prolonged malnutrition and stress without needing detailed explanations. "The children are resilient," Dr. Martinez told Daniel and Sarah after examining all 4 kids. "They're underweight and showing signs of vitamin deficiency, but nothing that good nutrition and care won't remedy. The baby is particularly concerning. She's quite small for her age, but I think she'll catch up quickly now that her mother is getting proper nutrition." He prescribed vitamins for all the children and gave Sarah detailed instructions about gradually increasing their food intake to avoid overwhelming their digestive systems. When Daniel quietly asked about payment, Dr. Martinez waved him off. "Consider it a community service," the doctor said. "Just bring them back in a month so I can check their progress." The drive back to the ranch was quieter, all 5 passengers exhausted by their first venture into the outside world in weeks. Emma fell asleep against Daniel's shoulder, while the twins dozed in Sarah's lap. Grace slept peacefully in her car seat, the first proper car seat she had ever had, purchased along with the clothes at Coleman's. "I don't know how to thank you," Sarah said quietly as they turned into the ranch driveway. "For the clothes, the doctor, everything. I've never had anyone just help like this, without wanting something in return." Daniel considered her words carefully. "Maybe that's part of the problem with the world," he said finally. "Too many people who only help when there's something in it for them." "But there has to be something you want," Sarah pressed. "Some reason you're doing all this for complete strangers." Daniel parked the truck and sat for a moment, listening to the soft breathing of the sleeping children. How could he explain that for 15 years he had been existing rather than living? That yesterday, for the first time since Catherine's death, he had felt genuinely useful, genuinely needed. "Maybe," he said slowly, "I'm not doing this just for you. Maybe I needed you as much as you needed me." Over the following days, a routine began to establish itself at the Lazy W Ranch. Sarah insisted on contributing however she could, taking over cooking duties and helping with household chores. She was an excellent cook, and Daniel found himself looking forward to meals in a way he hadn't in years. The children began to show their true personalities as fear and hunger receded. Emma revealed herself to be naturally curious and remarkably intelligent, asking endless questions about ranch life and listening intently to Daniel's explanations. The twins, Jacob and Joshua, developed a fascination with the horses, begging to be taken to the barn every day to visit the gentle mare named Buttercup. Grace, under her mother's improved care and proper nutrition, began to thrive. Her weak cries became stronger, her eyes brighter, her responses more engaged. Watching Sarah with the baby, Daniel saw glimpses of the confident mother. She must have been before circumstances broke her down, but it was the quiet moments that began to mean the most to Daniel. Emma read aloud from one of the children's books he had hastily purchased in town, her serious voice carefully pronouncing each word. Sarah humming while she folded laundry, the first time Daniel had heard music in his house since Catherine's death. The twins built elaborate towers with blocks on the living room floor, while Grace watched from her bouncy seat, gurgling with delight. The house was coming alive again, filled with the sounds and energy that had been missing for so long. Daniel found himself staying inside more, inventing reasons to delay his evening chores so he could spend more time with his unexpected family, because that's what they were becoming. Though neither Daniel nor Sarah was ready to acknowledge it directly. They were becoming a family unit, bound together by need and gratitude, but also by something deeper, genuine affection and growing trust. The first real test of their arrangement came on a Saturday evening, 2 weeks after Daniel had found them in the gas station. Sarah was bathing the children when they heard the sound of a vehicle approaching the house. Through the window, Daniel saw a sheriff's department cruiser pulling into his driveway. Sarah emerged from the bathroom, her face white with terror. "It's Marcus," she whispered. "He's found us. He's going to take the children." "No," Daniel said firmly, moving to stand between Sarah and the front door. "Nobody is taking anyone anywhere. Let me handle this." Sheriff Tom Bradley had known Daniel since they were boys, and their relationship was built on mutual respect and minimal interaction. Tom was a practical man who understood that some situations required delicate handling. "Evening, Daniel," Tom said when Daniel opened the door. "Sorry to bother you, but I had a report about some missing persons that might be in this area. A woman named Sarah Mitchell and 4 children." Daniel felt Sarah tense behind him, but he kept his voice steady. "What kind of report?" "Welfare check. Mainly, someone in Great Falls reported them as possibly homeless or in distress. Just want to make sure everyone's safe and accounted for." Daniel made a decision that would have profound implications for all their futures. "They're here, Tom. They're safe, they're healthy, and they're welcome to stay as long as they need to." Tom Bradley looked past Daniel, taking in the scene behind him, Sarah holding Grace, the 3 older children clustering around their mother, all of them clean, well-fed, and obviously cared for. "Ma'am," Tom addressed Sarah directly, "are you here of your own free will? Do you feel safe?" "Yes," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. "Mr. Whitmore saved our lives. We're exactly where we want to be." Tom nodded, satisfied by what he saw. "Well then, I'll file my report accordingly. Daniel, if you need anything, documentation, assistance with services for the children, you know where to find me." After the sheriff left, Sarah sat down heavily at the kitchen table, shaking with relief and residual fear. "I thought it was over," she admitted. "I thought Marcus had somehow tracked us down." "Even if he had," Daniel said, sitting across from her, "he wouldn't have gotten near you or the children. I promise you that." Sarah looked at him, really looked, seeing perhaps for the first time the strength and determination that had allowed this man to build a successful life in one of the harshest environments in America. She was beginning to understand that Daniel Whitmore was the kind of man who kept his promises, no matter the cost. "Why?" she asked again, the question that had been haunting her since that first night. "Why are you doing all this for us?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment, watching Emma help Joshua with a puzzle while Jacob showed Grace his favorite toy truck. The house hummed with the comfortable sounds of family life, sounds that had been absent for too many years. "Because," he said finally, "for the first time in 15 years, I remember what it feels like to be needed. And maybe, for the first time in your life, you're learning what it feels like to be truly safe." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness this time, but from something that might have been hope. Outside, the Montana winter continued, its relentless grip on the land, but inside the Lazy W Ranch, something beautiful and unexpected was taking root. The lonely cowboy and the desperate mother were discovering that sometimes the most profound connections are forged in the crucible of shared need and mutual rescue. Neither of them yet understood the full implications of what was growing between them, but both were beginning to believe that their story might have a different ending than either had dared to imagine. 3 weeks into their new life at the Lazy W Ranch, Sarah Mitchell was beginning to believe in the possibility of happiness. The children had filled out, their hollow cheeks replaced by healthy color. Emma's laughter echoed through the house as she helped Daniel with evening chores. The twins had established themselves as official ranch inspectors, following Daniel everywhere and asking questions about every piece of equipment, every animal, every aspect of ranch life. Grace had transformed most dramatically of all. The listless baby who had barely cried in the gas station had become an alert, responsive infant who smiled at the sound of familiar voices and reached eagerly for toys. She had gained 3 pounds under Dr. Martinez's care, and her developmental milestones were finally catching up to where they should be. Sarah herself was rediscovering parts of her personality that had been buried under years of fear and control. She found herself humming while she cooked, engaging in playful banter with Daniel over dinner, and even laughing at his dry observations about ranch life. The constant vigilance that had defined her existence with Marcus was gradually relaxing, replaced by something she had almost forgotten how to feel: contentment. But healing isn't linear, and the past has a way of casting long shadows even in the brightest present. The first crack in their peaceful existence came on a Thursday morning in early January. Daniel had gone to town for his weekly supply run, taking Emma with him as had become their tradition. She loved these trips, chattering about ranch improvements and asking Daniel to teach her the names of different feed supplements and veterinary supplies. Sarah was in the kitchen with the twins, and Grace when she heard the sound that had haunted her nightmares for months, the distinctive rumble of Marcus's motorcycle. Her blood turned to ice as she recognized the engine noise that had once meant her husband was coming home. but had come to represent danger and unpredictability. Moving to the window with trembling hands, Sarah peered through the curtains and felt her world tilt sideways. There, pulling up to the ranch house on his black Harley-Davidson, was Marcus Mitchell. He looked exactly as she remembered: leather jacket, dark stubble, and the cocky swagger that had once charmed her but now filled her with terror. The twins sensed their mother's fear immediately. Jacob and Joshua clustered around her legs, their young faces reflecting the anxiety that radiated from Sarah. Grace, picking up on the tension, began to fuss in her high chair. Marcus dismounted his bike and walked toward the house with the confident stride of a man who believed he owned everything he surveyed. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. Daniel wouldn't be back for at least 2 hours. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away. Her cell phone, the one Daniel had bought her just days earlier, was upstairs charging. The knock on the door came sharp and demanding, followed immediately by Marcus's voice, louder and more aggressive than Sarah remembered. "Sarah, I know you're in there. Open this door right now." Sarah gathered the twins close to her, whispering urgently, "Go to your room. Take Grace with you. Hide in the closet like we practiced for the fire drill, remember? Don't come out until I come get you, no matter what you hear." Emma wasn't there to help, and carrying Grace while herding 2 frightened toddlers proved challenging. But Sarah managed to get all 3 children upstairs and hidden in the master bedroom closet. She grabbed Daniel's hunting rifle from the gun cabinet. He had shown her where he kept it and taught her basic safety, though she had never imagined she would need to use it. When Sarah returned downstairs, Marcus was pounding on the door with increasing violence. "I know you're hiding in there, Sarah. You can't keep my children from me forever." Sarah stood behind the locked door, rifle in her shaking hands, and tried to find her voice. "Go away, Marcus. You have no right to be here." Marcus's laughter was harsh and familiar. "No right? Those are my kids, Sarah. My blood. You think you can just disappear with them? I've been looking for you for months." "You left us," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger with anger. "You walked out and left us with nothing. You said we ruined your life." "I changed my mind," Marcus replied, his tone shifting to the manipulative sweetness she remembered from their early courtship. "I've been thinking about our family, about how much I miss you and the kids. I want us to be together again, baby. I want to make things right." Sarah had heard these promises before, had fallen for them more times than she cared to remember, but this time was different. This time she had seen what real safety looked like, what genuine care felt like. She had watched Daniel interact with her children, never raising his voice, never demanding instant obedience, never using his size or strength to intimidate. "It's too late, Marcus," Sarah said firmly. "We're not coming back. We have a good life here." The facade of reasonableness dropped instantly. "A good life? With some stranger? You think I'm going to let another man raise my children?" His voice rose to a roar. "You belong to me, Sarah. Those kids belong to me." Marcus began throwing his weight against the door, and Sarah realized with growing panic that the old farmhouse's door wasn't built to withstand a sustained assault. The wood around the deadbolt was already beginning to splinter. Sarah ran to the kitchen. Phone Daniel had insisted on keeping a landline for emergencies and dialed 911 with trembling fingers. 911, what's your emergency? This is Sarah Mitchell. At the Lazy W Ranch on Highway 287. My ex-husband is trying to break into the house. He's violent and I have children here. Please send help. Deputies are on their way, ma'am. Are you in immediate danger? The sound of the front door finally giving way answered that question. Sarah heard Marcus's boots on the hardwood floor, heard him calling her name with a mixture of rage and false affection that she remembered too well. He's inside the house, Sarah whispered into the phone before hanging up and gripping the rifle more tightly. Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway, his dark eyes scanning the room. Before settling on Sarah, she was surprised to see how much he had deteriorated in the months since he'd left them. His face was thinner, his eyes were bloodshot, and there was a manic quality to his movements that suggested drugs or severe psychological stress. "There's my beautiful wife," he said, his voice sickeningly sweet. Then his eyes fell on the rifle in her hands, and his expression darkened. "What the hell do you think you're doing with that gun, Sarah?" "Protecting my children," Sarah replied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "You need to leave, Marcus, right now." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're not going to shoot me, baby. You don't have it in you. You're too soft, too weak. That's why you need me to take care of you." He took a step toward her, and Sarah raised the rifle to her shoulder. "Don't come any closer." "Where are my kids, Sarah?" "I want to see my children." "They're not your children anymore," Sarah said, the words coming from some deep well of strength she didn't know she possessed. "You gave up any claim to them when you abandoned us. When you left us to die." Marcus's face contorted with rage. "I never abandoned you. I went to find work, to find a way to support the family. And what do I find when I come back? You're shacked up with some cowboy, playing house like a little whore." The insult hit Sarah like a physical blow, but it also crystallized something inside her. For years, Marcus had defined her reality, had convinced her that his version of events was the truth. But now, having experienced real kindness and respect, she could see his manipulation for what it was. "You're lying," Sarah said simply. "You left because you never wanted us. You said we ruined your life. You took everything we had and disappeared." "That's not," Marcus began, but the sound of sirens in the distance cut him off. His head snapped toward the window, and Sarah saw panic flicker across his features. "You called the cops on me?" He snarled. "On your own husband?" "Ex-husband," Sarah corrected. "And yes, I called them. Just like I should have years ago." Marcus's demeanor shifted again, becoming calculating. "Fine, but this isn't over, Sarah. Those kids are mine, and I'll get them back. I know people who can help me. I know things about this situation that you don't understand." Before Sarah could ask what he meant, Marcus was moving toward the back door. But instead of leaving immediately, he grabbed a framed photo from the kitchen counter, a picture Daniel had taken of the family just the week before, all of them smiling in front of the Christmas tree they had decorated together. "I'll be back," Marcus said, pocketing the photo. "And next time your cowboy boyfriend won't be able to protect you." Marcus disappeared out the back door just as sheriff's deputies were pulling into the front driveway. Sarah sank into a kitchen chair, the rifle clattering to the floor as her hands began to shake uncontrollably. Deputy Rodriguez was the first through the broken front door, weapon drawn, followed closely by Deputy Chen. They quickly secured the house and confirmed that the intruder was gone before turning their attention to Sarah. "Ma'am, are you injured?" Deputy Rodriguez asked, holstering his weapon and approaching Sarah with professional concern. "No," Sarah managed, "but my children are upstairs. They're hiding. They're probably terrified." Deputy Chun went to retrieve the children while Rodriguez took Sarah's statement. The process of recounting the confrontation brought back all the old feelings of helplessness and shame that Sarah had been working so hard to overcome. When Daniel and Emma returned from town 20 minutes later, they found the ranch swarming with law enforcement vehicles. Daniel's face went white as he took in the scene. The broken front door, the deputies, Sarah sitting at the kitchen table looking shaken and pale. "What happened?" Daniel demanded, rushing to Sarah's side. "Marcus was here," Sarah said simply, and watched Daniel's expression shift from concern to cold fury. "Where is he now?" "Gone," Deputy Rodriguez answered. "But we've got an AP out on him. Description of his vehicle, last known direction of travel. We'll find him." Daniel knelt beside Sarah's chair, his large hands gentle as he examined her for injuries. "Are you hurt? Are the kids okay?" "We're fine," Sarah assured him, though her voice shook. "The children are upstairs with the other deputy. They're scared, but they're safe." Emma, who had been listening with wide eyes, suddenly spoke up. "Is the bad man going to come back and hurt Mama?" The question hung in the air, highlighting the reality that none of them wanted to face. Marcus knew where they were now. He had made threats, and his parting words suggested this confrontation was just the beginning of a larger campaign. "No," Daniel said firmly, looking directly at Emma. "Nobody is going to hurt your mama or any of you. I promise." But even as he made the promise, Daniel's mind was racing through the implications of Marcus's visit. The man had found them somehow, which meant their location was no longer secret. Worse, he had been inside their home, had seen their life, had threatened their safety. Deputy Rodriguez finished taking statements and assured them that patrols would be increased in the area. He also recommended some practical security measures, better locks, motion sensor lights, perhaps a security system. After the deputies left, Daniel worked on boarding up the broken front door while Sarah tried to comfort the children. The twins kept asking why the bad man had come to their house, while Grace clung to her mother with unusual fussiness. Even Emma, usually so brave and composed, stayed close to the adults. That night, nobody slept well. Daniel moved his bedroom downstairs to the living room, positioning himself between the family and any potential threat. Sarah lay awake listening to every sound, every creak of the old house settling, every whisper of wind through the trees, but it was Emma who voiced the fear they were all feeling. "Daniel," she whispered in the darkness, "what if the bad man comes back when you're not here?" Daniel had been wondering the same thing. Marcus's visit had shattered the sense of security they had all been building. The Lazy W Ranch, which had felt like a sanctuary, now felt vulnerable and exposed. "We're going to make some changes," Daniel said quietly. "We're going to make sure everyone stays safe." But privately, Daniel was making calculations of a different sort. Marcus Mitchell had declared war on their little family, and Daniel Whitmore had never been a man to back down from a fight. The question wasn't whether Marcus would return, it was whether Daniel would be ready for him. When he did, the peaceful chapter of their story was over. What came next would test everything they had built together and determine whether their unlikely family could survive the shadows of the past that had finally caught up with them. Outside, the Montana wind howled through the darkness, and somewhere in that vast landscape, Marcus Mitchell was planning his next move. The battle for the Mitchell family had begun, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. The lonely cowboy who had rescued a desperate mother and her children was about to discover just how far he was willing to go to protect the family he had come to love. And Sarah was about to learn whether the strength she had found in their sanctuary was enough to stand against the man who had once controlled every aspect of her life. The real test of their bond was just beginning. The morning after Marcus's invasion of their sanctuary, Daniel Whitmore stood in his barn before dawn, methodically checking every inch of his property for signs of surveillance or hidden threats. The attack on their home had transformed the gentle rancher into something harder, more vigilant. His 23 years of solitary ranch life had taught him to be self-reliant and protective of what was his. And now that extended to 5 people who had become more precious to him than his own life. Sarah found him there an hour later, a steaming cup of coffee in her hands and shadows under her eyes that spoke of a sleepless night. "You didn't come to bed," she said quietly, though they both knew Daniel had been sleeping on the living room couch since Marcus's visit. "Couldn't sleep anyway," Daniel replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I've been thinking about what he said before he left. About knowing people who could help him, about things we don't understand." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself against the morning chill. Marcus always claimed to have connections, people who owed him favors. Most of it was probably lies, but she trailed off, remembering the fake identification cards she had found in his wallet years ago. "Tell me about his past," Daniel said. Everything you know, everything you suspected. For the next hour, as the sun rose over the Montana landscape, Sarah shared details about her former husband that she had never spoken aloud, the inconsistencies in his stories about work, the way he always paid for things in cash, the phone calls he took in private, speaking in hushed tones to people he never identified, the times he came home with injuries he couldn't or wouldn't explain. "I think he was involved in something illegal," Sarah admitted. "Maybe drugs, maybe. Theft. I was too scared to ask questions, and honestly, I didn't want to know." Daniel absorbed this information silently, his mind working through the implications. If Marcus was involved in criminal activity, he might indeed have access to people willing to help him reclaim what he saw as his property. The thought made Daniel's blood run cold. "We need help," Daniel said finally. "Professional help." Their first stop was Sheriff Bradley's office in town. Tom Bradley had known Daniel long enough to recognize when the normally reserved rancher was operating on a different level of intensity. "I need to know everything you can find out about Marcus Mitchell," Daniel said without preamble. "Background, criminal history, known associates, everything." Tom leaned back in his chair, studying Daniel's face. "This is about yesterday's incident. At your place? This is about protecting a woman and 4 children from a dangerous man," Daniel replied. "Whatever resources you need to make that happen, I'll provide them." Tom nodded slowly. He had seen the Mitchell family during their visit to Dr. Martinez, had witnessed the transformation from the terrified, malnourished group he had first encountered to the healthy, happy children they were becoming under Daniel's care. "I'll make some calls," Tom promised. "But Daniel, if this man is as dangerous as you think, you might want to consider some additional precautions." Those precautions began immediately. Daniel's first call was to Jake Morrison, Pete's son, who ran a security installation business, serving ranches throughout the county. Within hours, Jake was at the Lazy W installing motion sensor lights, security cameras, and an alarm system that would alert both the house and the sheriff's department to any unauthorized intrusion. Daniel's second call was to his lawyer, Helen Crawford, who had handled his father's estate and various ranch business over the years. Helen was a sharp woman in her 60s who specialized in family law and had little patience for men who threatened women and children. "I want to explore every legal option for protecting this family," Daniel told her. "Restraining orders, custody, issues, whatever it takes." Helen's investigation into Marcus Mitchell's legal status revealed troubling information. He had never actually filed for divorce from Sarah, which meant he still had certain legal rights regarding the children. Worse, there was no official record of him abandoning the family, which complicated any custody proceedings. "The good news," Helen explained to Daniel and Sarah during a meeting in her office, "is that his behavior yesterday breaking into the house, making threats, gives us grounds for a restraining order. The bad news is that enforcing such an order against someone who seems to operate outside the law may be challenging." Meanwhile, Sheriff Bradley's investigation was uncovering disturbing details about Marcus Mitchell's background. The man had a criminal history spanning multiple states, fraud, assault, drug possession, and suspected involvement in several cons targeting vulnerable women. Most alarming was a pattern of identity theft and the use of multiple aliases. "The Marcus Mitchell your Sarah married might not even be his real name," Tom told Daniel privately. "We're still trying to piece together his actual identity." As the adults worked to build legal and physical barriers against Marcus, the children were dealing with their own trauma from his visit. Emma had become hyper-vigilant, constantly checking windows and asking when Daniel would be back whenever he left the house. The twins had started having nightmares, waking up crying for their mother. Even Grace seemed more clingy, fussing whenever Sarah was out of sight. That Sarah struggled with guilt over the fear her past had brought into their peaceful life. She found herself apologizing constantly for Marcus's visit, for the broken door, for the disruption to their routine. "Stop," Daniel said firmly one evening as Sarah began another round of apologies. "You didn't choose this. You didn't ask for any of it. The only person responsible for Marcus's actions is Marcus." But Sarah's guilt was compounded by a growing realization that her feelings for Daniel had evolved far beyond gratitude. Somewhere in the weeks of shared meals, quiet conversations, and watching him interact with her children, she had fallen in love with the steady gentleman who had saved their lives. The thought terrified her almost as much as Marcus's threats. The breakthrough in their defensive preparations came from an unexpected source. Emma, who had been unusually quiet since Marcus's visit, approached Daniel one evening with a serious expression. "Daniel, I remembered something about the bad man," she said carefully. "When he was talking to Mama, he said he knew things we didn't understand. But I think I know what he meant." Emma had overheard a phone conversation Marcus had made during one of his last visits to their apartment in Great Falls. He had been talking to someone about the Denver situation and about people who were looking for him. He said he had something they wanted, and if they found him, he'd make sure they never got it back. Emma recounted with the precise memory of a child who had learned to pay attention to adult conversations that might signal danger. The information sent chills through both Daniel and Sarah. If Marcus was being pursued by other criminals, his desperation to reclaim his family might stem from more than just possessiveness. He might be planning to use them as leverage or hiding places in whatever criminal enterprise he was involved in. Daniel made a decision that night that would change everything. He called a number he hadn't used in over a decade, his brother Michael, who worked for the FBI in Denver. Michael Whitmore had taken a different path than his rancher brother, pursuing a career in federal law enforcement that had made him an expert in organized crime and fraud investigations. The brothers had grown apart after their father's death, but family loyalty ran deep in the Whitmore bloodline. "Danny?" Michael's voice was surprised and pleased. "I haven't heard from you in years. What's going on?" Daniel explained the situation in careful detail, from finding the Mitchell family to Marcus's threats and his suspected criminal connections. Michael listened without interruption, his law enforcement training evident in the questions he asked. "You might be dealing with something bigger than a domestic dispute," Michael said finally. "Let me run the name Marcus Mitchell through our databases, see what comes up. And Danny, be careful. If this guy is running from federal charges, he's got nothing to lose." The FBI investigation moved with surprising speed. Within 2 days, Michael called back with information that made Daniel's worst fears seem optimistic. Marcus Mitchell was indeed an alias. The man's real name was Martin Kozlov, and he was wanted in connection with a multi-state fraud scheme targeting military families. He had bilked dozens of families out of their savings through fake investment schemes, always moving on before authorities could catch up with him. "But here's the really bad news," Michael continued. 3 months ago, he stole $2 million from a money laundering operation run by the Petrov crime family in Denver. They've been looking for him ever since, and they're not the kind of people who forgive and forget. The revelation put Marcus's recent behavior in a terrifying new context. He wasn't just an abusive ex-husband trying to reclaim his family. He was a desperate criminal on the run from both federal authorities and violent criminals. And he saw Sarah and the children as his ticket to survival. He probably thinks having his family back will give him legitimacy, make him look like a settled family man instead of a fugitive, Michael explained. Or worse, he might be planning to use them as human shields. Daniel felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. The gentle rancher who had rescued a desperate family was being forced to confront the possibility that he might have to fight not just one unstable man, but potentially an entire criminal organization. "What do you recommend?" Daniel asked his brother. "Officially? Get the family into witness protection until we can apprehend Kozlov. Unofficially?" Michael's voice grew grim. You're in a better position to protect them on your ranch than they'd be in some safe house in another state. You know the terrain, you have community support, and frankly, you're probably better motivated than any federal marshal. The conversation with Michael crystallized Daniel's thinking. He had spent weeks trying to solve this problem through legal channels and defensive measures, but Martin Kozlov had already proven he didn't respect legal boundaries. The next confrontation wouldn't be a domestic dispute that could be handled by local law enforcement. It would be a war for the survival of the family Daniel had come to love. That night, Daniel made a series of phone calls that activated a network of relationships built over decades of rural Montana life. To his neighbor, Chuck Hartley, a Marine veteran who owned the adjacent ranch. To Pete Morrison, whose 3 sons were all experienced hunters and marksmen. To Doc Martinez, who promised to be on standby for any medical emergencies. To Father Miguel, at the Catholic Church, who began organizing a prayer chain for the family's protection. By the end of the week, the Lazy W Ranch had been transformed into something resembling a fortress. The main house was equipped with reinforced doors, security cameras, and communication equipment that linked directly to the sheriff's department. The barn had been set up as a secondary defensive position, stocked with supplies and weapons. More importantly, Daniel had assembled a small army of friends and neighbors who understood that protecting the Mitchell family wasn't just about helping strangers, it was about defending the values that held their community together. Sarah watched these preparations with a mixture of gratitude and growing dread. Every security measure, every defensive position, every weapon that appeared on the ranch drove home the reality that their peaceful sanctuary was about to become a battlefield. "I'm sorry," she told Daniel one evening as they stood on the porch, watching the children play in the yard, now surrounded by motion sensors and security cameras. "I'm sorry we brought this into your life." Daniel turned to face her, his weathered hands gentle as he cupped her face. "Sarah, you didn't bring trouble into my life. You brought life into my life. Those children, watching them grow and learn and feel safe, that's worth fighting for. You're worth fighting for." The words hung in the air between them, carrying implications that neither was quite ready to voice. But in that moment, Sarah understood that whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. The lonely cowboy who had rescued her family was prepared to risk everything to keep them safe. As if sensing the gravity of the adult conversation, Emma appeared at Daniel's side, slipping her small hand into his much larger one. "Are you going to keep us safe from the bad man?" she asked with the directness of childhood. "Yes," Daniel promised, his voice carrying the weight of absolute commitment. "I'm going to keep all of you safe." But even as he made the promise, Daniel's eyes scanned the horizon, searching for signs of the storm he knew was coming. Martin Kozlov would return. And when he did, he would discover that the desperate family he had abandoned had found something he had never given them, a protector who would die before letting them be hurt again. The war for the Mitchell family was about to begin, and Daniel Whitmore intended to win it. 2 weeks had passed since Michael Whitmore's revelations about Martin Kozlov's criminal connections, and the Lazy W Ranch had settled into a tense rhythm of heightened security and forced normalcy. Daniel maintained his daily routines while constantly scanning for threats. Sarah worked to keep the children's lives as stable as possible while battling her own anxiety, and the community maintained a protective watch that had become as natural as checking the weather. The February thaw had begun early, turning the ranch roads into muddy channels and filling the air with the promise of spring. But the seasonal change brought new concerns. Better weather would make travel easier for anyone seeking to reach the isolated ranch, and the melting snow would eliminate the natural tracking advantages that winter provided. It was during this period of watchful waiting that unexpected developments began to reshape their understanding of the threat they faced. The first surprise came from FBI agent Michael Whitmore, who arrived at the ranch on a Tuesday morning driving an unmarked sedan. and carrying news that changed everything. "We found Kozlov," Michael announced without preamble as he sat at Daniel's kitchen table. Or rather, the Petrov organization found him first. Sarah, who had been feeding Grace her morning bottle, went pale. "What do you mean?" Michael's expression was grim. Martin Kozlov was discovered 3 days ago in a Denver warehouse, beaten to death. The $2 million he stole was missing, and there were signs he had been tortured before he died. The news should have brought relief. Their primary threat was eliminated. Instead, it opened new questions that chilled everyone in the room. "The problem," Michael continued, "is that the Petrovs are still looking for their money. And according to our informants, they believe Kozlov stashed it somewhere before his death. They're investigating everyone he had contact with in the months before he disappeared." Daniel felt the implications settle over him like a shroud. "They're going to come looking for Sarah and the children." "It's possible," Michael admitted. "These people are thorough, and they don't leave loose ends. If they think the family knows something about the money's location, they'll come." Sarah stood abruptly, still holding Grace, her voice shaking with barely controlled panic. "But we don't know anything. Marcus never told me about any money. We were living in poverty when he left us." "I believe you," Michael said gently, "but the Petrovs won't take your word for it. They'll want to interrogate you themselves, and their methods aren't gentle." The revelation that their enemy had changed from one desperate man to an entire criminal organization sent shockwaves through the protective network Daniel had assembled. Chuck Hartley arrived within an hour of Michael's departure, followed by the Morrison brothers and Sheriff Bradley. The informal council that gathered in Daniel's living room had the gravity of a war cabinet. "This changes everything," Sheriff Bradley said bluntly. "Professional criminals with resources aren't the same as dealing with one unstable individual. We need to consider evacuation." "No," the word came from Sarah with surprising firmness. Everyone turned to look at her, seeing the strength in her posture that hadn't been there weeks earlier. "I'm tired of running. We found a home here, found family. I won't let criminals drive us away from the first place we've ever felt safe." Emma, who had been quietly coloring at the kitchen table, looked up at the adults with serious eyes. "Are more bad men coming to hurt us?" Daniel knelt beside her chair, his voice gentle but honest. "Maybe, sweetheart. But if they do, we're going to be ready for them. Will you protect us like you protected us from my first daddy?" "Yes," Daniel promised. "I'll protect all of you, no matter what." The planning session that followed was unlike anything the rural Montana community had ever undertaken. Chuck Hartley, drawing on his military experience, outlined defensive positions and fields of fire. The Morrison brothers discussed ammunition supplies and communication protocols. Sheriff Bradley coordinated with state police and federal authorities to ensure rapid response capabilities, but it was Michael Whitmore who provided the most crucial intelligence. His FBI contacts had intercepted communications, suggesting that a Petrov advance team was already en route to Montana, tasked with locating and questioning Kozlov's family. "They're professionals," Michael warned. "Ex-military, well-equipped, and absolutely ruthless. They won't announce themselves or give you a chance to surrender. When they come, it will be fast and violent." The next 72 hours transformed the Lazy W Ranch into something resembling a military compound. Additional security cameras were installed along the access roads. Motion sensors created an invisible perimeter around the property. Emergency communication equipment linked the ranch to law enforcement agencies across 3 counties. Most importantly, Daniel implemented a protection protocol that prioritized the children's safety above all else. A reinforced safe room was constructed in the ranch house basement, stocked with food, water, communication equipment, and medical supplies. Sarah practiced evacuating the children to the sanctuary until they could reach it, in under 2 minutes from anywhere in the house. But the most significant change was in Sarah herself. The terrified woman who had once submitted to Marcus's abuse was rapidly becoming someone Daniel barely recognized, strong, determined, and fiercely protective of her children. "Teach me to shoot," Sarah told Daniel one evening after the children were asleep. "Really shoot, not just hold a rifle and hope." For the next week, Daniel spent hours training Sarah in marksmanship, weapon safety, and tactical awareness. She proved to be a natural shot, with steady hands and the kind of focused determination that made her dangerous to anyone who threatened her family. "You're better at this than I expected," Daniel admitted as Sarah consistently hit targets at 100 yards. "I'm fighting for my children," Sarah replied simply. "That makes me capable of things I never thought possible." The training sessions became a bonding experience that deepened the connection growing between Daniel and Sarah, working together toward a common goal, trusting each other with their lives, sharing the intense focus of preparation for battle. It created an intimacy that went beyond mere attraction. One evening, as they cleaned weapons together after the children's bedtime, Sarah asked the question that had been haunting her for weeks. "After this is over, assuming we survive, what happens? Then? Do we stay here? Do we try to build a normal life? Do you want us to?" Daniel's hands stilled on the rifle he was cleaning. The question touched on feelings and possibilities he had been afraid to examine too closely. "Sarah," he said carefully, "these past weeks, having you and the children here, it's shown me what I've been missing all these years. This house was never a home until you arrived. If you'll have me, if you can see a future here, then yes, I want you to stay. All of you. Forever." The admission hung in the air between them, carrying the weight of love finally acknowledged. Sarah set down her own weapon and moved closer to Daniel, her eyes searching his face. "Even knowing all the trouble I've brought into your life? Even knowing there might be more danger ahead?" "Especially knowing that," Daniel replied, his weathered hands gentle as they cupped her face. "You've made me remember what it means to have something worth fighting for." Their first kiss was tender and desperate, flavored with the knowledge that it might also be their last. In that moment, with weapons spread across the table and danger approaching from the darkness, they found a connection that transcended their circumstances. Emma's voice from the stairway broke the spell. "Mama, are you and Daniel going to get married?" Sarah and Daniel pulled apart, both blushing like teenagers caught by disapproving parents. Emma stood on the stairs in her pajamas, her young face serious but not upset. "Would that be okay with you?" Sarah asked her daughter. "If Daniel became part of our family officially?" Emma considered this gravely, then nodded. "I think that would be good. Daniel keeps us safe, and he makes you smile. And he taught me how to feed the horses." The innocent acceptance of a 4-year-old somehow made the complex emotions between the adults feel simple and right. They were already a family in every way that mattered. Legal formalities could wait until after they survived whatever was coming. The attack, when it finally came, arrived with the dawn of a deceptively peaceful Thursday morning. Daniel was in the barn feeding horses when the perimeter alarms began shrieking. 3 black SUVs had breached the outer sensors, moving fast up the ranch. Access road with military precision. Daniel's training kicked in immediately. He triggered the emergency alert that would summon help from their community network and the sheriff's department, then raced toward the house where Sarah was already implementing the evacuation protocol. "Safe room now," Sarah commanded, and the children responded with the speed of repeated practice. Emma herded the twins toward the basement while Sarah grabbed emergency supplies and Grace's carrier. But as they reached the safe room entrance, Daniel appeared with news that changed everything. "They've surrounded the house," he reported grimly. 3 vehicles, at least 9 men, professional gear. "But something's different. They're not attacking. They're waiting." A voice amplified by a bullhorn confirmed Daniel's observation. "We know you're in there. We're not here to hurt anyone. We just want to talk about Martin Kozlov and some property that belongs to our employers. Sarah's blood ran cold at the mention of Marcus's real name. These were the Petrov operatives Michael had warned them about, and they had finally arrived to collect what they believed was owed to them. What do they want? Emma whispered, her young voice tight with fear. They think we know something about money that Marcus stole, Sarah explained. But we don't know anything. Daniel's mind raced through their options. The safe room would protect them temporarily, but it wasn't a permanent solution. Their community backup was still minutes away, and professional criminals wouldn't wait. Long before escalating their approach, the bullhorn voice came again, this time with an edge of impatience. Mrs. Kozlov, we know you can hear us. We're going to give you 5 minutes to come out and talk. If you don't, we'll have to come in and get you. You don't want that. We need a strategy, Daniel said, checking his weapon and mentally cataloging their defensive options. They won't wait much longer. Sarah looked at her children huddled in the safe room, Emma trying to be brave, the twins clinging to each other, Grace sleeping peacefully despite the chaos around her. These innocent lives depended on the decisions made in the next few minutes. I'll go out and talk to them, Sarah said suddenly. Maybe if I convince them we really don't know anything about the money, they'll leave us alone. Absolutely not, Daniel replied firmly. I'm not letting you walk into the hands of killers. It might be our only chance to end this without violence. Sarah argued. If they get what they came for, information about the money, maybe they'll go away. But before Daniel could respond, the sound of helicopter rotors filled the air. Through the small basement window, they could see FBI helicopters approaching from the east while sheriff's department vehicles raced up the road from the west. The cavalry had arrived, but the battle for the Mitchell family's freedom was just beginning. In the next few minutes, years of running and hiding would either end in tragedy or triumph. Daniel grabbed Sarah's hand, looking into her eyes with an intensity that conveyed everything he felt but couldn't say in front of the children. Whatever happens, he told her, know that these months with you and the children have been the best of my life. You've given me everything I didn't know I was missing. Sarah squeezed his hand in return, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. And you gave us life when we were dying. You gave us love when we thought we were unlovable. Whatever happens, we face it together. Outside, the standoff between federal agents and Petrov operatives was about to begin. The final battle for the Mitchell family's freedom would be decided not just by weapons and tactics, but by the strength of the bonds that had been forged in their unlikely sanctuary. The lonely cowboy and the desperate mother had found love in the midst of danger, but their happy ending would have to be earned through fire and blood. The next hour would determine whether their story ended in tragedy or triumph. The standoff at the Lazy W Ranch unfolded with the surreal intensity of a Hollywood thriller transplanted into the heart of rural Montana. 3 black SUVs formed a semicircle around the ranch house, their occupants visible through tinted windows as shadows with military-grade equipment. FBI helicopters circled overhead like mechanical vultures, while sheriff's department vehicles blocked the access road, creating a perimeter that trapped everyone inside a deadly game of chess. Agent Michael Whitmore's voice crackled through Daniel's radio, calm but urgent. Danny, sit tight. We've got them surrounded, but they're not backing down. This could get messy. From their basement safe room, the family could hear the competing authority of federal agents and Petrov operatives as both sides claimed jurisdiction over the situation. The children huddled together on the reinforced bench Daniel had built, while Sarah held Grace and tried to project calm she didn't feel. How long do we have to stay down here? Joshua whispered, his 3-year-old vocabulary struggling with concepts far beyond his understanding. Until the bad men go away, Emma answered with the authority of an older sister who had become wise beyond her years. Daniel and the police will make them leave. But the situation above ground was more complex than a simple matter of law enforcement removing criminals. The Petrov operatives had arrived with their own legal representation, expensive lawyers, who argued that their clients were private investigators hired to recover stolen property. They demanded the right to question Sarah Mitchell about her deceased husband's activities. Agent Marcus Webb, the FBI field commander who had flown in from Denver, found himself navigating a jurisdictional nightmare. The Petrov organization operated through shell companies and legitimate fronts, making it difficult to arrest their operatives without concrete evidence of criminal intent. "Mrs. Kozlov," came the amplified voice again, this time speaking directly into the house through a portable PA system. "We know you're listening. We're not here to hurt you or your children. We simply need information about property your husband stole from our employers. Cooperate with us, and we'll leave you in peace." Daniel's jaw clenched at the reasonable tone that concealed deadly intent. He had seen enough of the world to know that men like these didn't leave witnesses, especially witnesses who could identify them to federal authorities. "They're lying," Daniel said into his radio. "Michael, these people don't intend to let anyone walk away from this." "I know," Michael's voice replied. "But our hands are tied until they make an overt move. Their lawyers are threatening lawsuits. If we don't allow them to conduct their legitimate business inquiry, the legal maneuvering might have continued indefinitely." But Emma Mitchell inadvertently changed everything. The 4-year-old, growing restless in the confined space, remembered something that had puzzled her for months. "Mama," Emma said quietly, "I think I know about the money the bad men are looking for." Sarah's attention snapped to her daughter. With laser focus, "What do you mean, sweetheart? Remember when the first daddy was packing to leave? He had that big envelope he hid in my stuffed rabbit. The one he took when he went away." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Marcus had taken Emma's favorite toy, a large stuffed rabbit named Mr. Hoppers, when he left them. At the time, Sarah had assumed it was just another act of casual cruelty, taking something precious from his daughter. But if Emma was right, Marcus had used the toy as a hiding place for something valuable. "Emma, are you sure about this?" Sarah asked gently. "Yes, Mama. I saw him cut open Mr. Hopper's back and put the envelope inside. Then he sewed it up again. I was sad because I thought he was hurting Mr. Hoppers." Daniel understood the implications immediately. If Marcus had hidden information about the stolen money inside the stuffed rabbit, and if the Petrov operatives recovered that information, they might indeed leave the family alone. But it would also mean admitting that they had knowledge of Marcus's criminal activities, potentially making them accessories after the fact. "We need to tell them," Sarah said, her voice heavy with the weight of impossible decisions. "If this information can end this standoff, we have to use it." "Sarah, once you give them what they want, you become a liability," Daniel warned. "These people eliminate loose ends." Before Sarah could respond, the situation above ground escalated dramatically. One of the Petrov operatives, growing impatient with the legal stalemate, made the mistake of drawing his weapon when Agent Webb approached their vehicle. The response was immediate and overwhelming. FBI snipers, positioned on the surrounding hills, had clear shots on all the operatives. Sheriff's deputies, armed with military surplus equipment, moved into tactical positions. The pretense of a civil investigation evaporated in seconds. "This is Agent Webb, FBI." The amplified voice carried authority and finality. "You are surrounded by federal agents. Drop your weapons and surrender immediately." Instead of surrendering, the Petrov team made a decision that transformed the standoff into a firefight. Smoke grenades deployed from their vehicles as they attempted to create cover for an assault on the ranch house. Daniel's military instincts, dormant for decades, surged back to life. "Stay in the safe room," he commanded Sarah and the children. "No matter what you hear, don't come out until I come get you." "Daniel, no!" Sarah grabbed his arm. "You can't go up there." "Those men are coming for you and the children," Daniel replied, his voice carrying the cold certainty of a man prepared to die for his family. "I won't let them reach you." Emma looked up at Daniel with absolute trust. "You'll come back, right? You promised to keep us safe." "I keep my promises," Daniel assured her, kissing her forehead with the tenderness of a father saying goodbye to his daughter. The battle for the Lazy W Ranch began with the systematic precision of a military operation. Daniel moved through his house with the fluid efficiency of someone defending home ground, using his intimate knowledge of every corner and site, line to maximum advantage. The first Petrov operative through the front door walked into a rifle shot that dropped him instantly. Daniel had positioned himself in the kitchen, with clear fields of fire into the living room and down the main hallway. Years of hunting Montana wildlife had made him an expert marksman, and defending his family elevated his skills to lethal levels, but professional killers don't fall easily. The remaining operatives deployed tactical equipment that turned the ranch house into a war zone. Flashbang grenades shattered windows and disoriented defenders. Smoke filled the rooms, reducing visibility to mere feet. Automatic weapons chattered their deadly rhythm as trained killers attempted to overwhelm a single rancher's desperate defense. Outside, FBI agents engaged the operative support team in a running gun battle that shattered the morning peace of rural Montana. Helicopters provided covering fire while ground teams maneuvered to surround the ranch buildings. Sheriff's deputies, outgunned but determined, held perimeter positions that prevented any escape. In the basement safe room, Sarah held her children close as the sounds of warfare raged above them. Grace cried at the unfamiliar noise, while the twins clung to their mother with wide-eyed terror. Only Emma remained relatively calm, her faith in Daniel's promise unshaken despite the chaos surrounding them. "Daniel will stop the bad men," Emma told her younger brothers with the certainty of childhood trust. "He always keeps us safe." But upstairs, Daniel was fighting a losing battle against superior numbers and equipment. A second operative had made it into the house through the back door, forcing Daniel to defend multiple positions simultaneously. Professional training began to tell as the attackers coordinated their assault with military precision. Daniel took a bullet in his shoulder, the impact spinning him around and momentarily disrupting his defensive fire. Blood soaked through his shirt, but adrenaline and determination kept him functional. He had promised to protect this family, and no amount of pain would make him break that promise. The turning point came when Chuck Hartley and the Morrison brothers arrived at the ranch. Daniel's neighbors had ignored orders to stay away, approaching through the back pastures with hunting rifles and the kind of local knowledge that made them invisible to urban criminals. Chuck's first shot took out the operative who had wounded Daniel, the bullet fired from a position no one had expected to be occupied. The Morrison brothers, all veterans of hunting seasons that had taught them patience and precision, began systematically eliminating the remaining attackers with shots that spoke of intimate familiarity with their weapons. Agent Webb, recognizing the shift in momentum, ordered his teams to press their advantage. FBI agents stormed the ranch yard as the remaining Petrov operatives found themselves caught between professional law enforcement and angry Montana ranchers. The firefight ended as suddenly as it had begun. Smoke cleared to reveal a scene of devastation. Bullet holes pocked the ranch house walls, windows lay shattered, and the smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the morning air. But the threat was over. The surviving Petrov operatives were in federal custody, their leader dead. Their mission failed. Daniel, bleeding but alive, made his way to the basement on unsteady legs. When he opened the safe room door, Sarah flew into his arms with a force that nearly knocked him over. "You're hurt," she said, her hands finding the blood on his shoulder. "I'm alive," Daniel replied, pulling her close despite the pain. "We're all alive. It's over." Emma emerged from the safe room with the composure of someone far older than her 4 years. "You kept your promise," she said simply, wrapping her small arms around Daniel's legs. The twins, Jacob and Joshua, clung to Daniel's uninjured side, their young minds unable to fully process what had happened, but understanding that their protector had returned as promised. Grace, sensing the change in atmosphere, stopped crying and looked around with the alert curiosity of a baby discovering that the world was safe again. Agent Michael Whitmore found his brother sitting on the porch steps an hour later, his wounded shoulder bandaged by paramedics, surrounded by the family he had fought to protect. The children played quietly in the yard while Sarah sat beside Daniel, her hand resting on his uninjured arm. "The lawyers are saying it was self-defense and defense of others," Michael reported. "No charges will be filed against you or the neighbors who helped. The surviving Petrov operatives are looking at federal racketeering charges that will put them away for life." "And the money?" Daniel asked. Emma was right about the stuffed rabbit. "We found it in a storage unit Kozlov rented under another alias. $2 million in bearer bonds hidden inside a child's toy." Michael shook his head at the audacity. "The Petrov organization will get their money back, which should end their interest in this family." Sarah looked up at Daniel with eyes that held a mixture of exhaustion and hope. "Is it really over? Can we finally stop running?" "It's over," Daniel assured her, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "You're safe. The children are safe. This is your home now, for as long as you want it." Emma, who had been listening to the adult conversation with the intensity that characterized her approach to everything, spoke up with a question that cut to the heart of their future. "Daniel, are you going to be our daddy now? Our real daddy?" The question hung in the air, carrying the weight of everything they had endured together and everything they hoped to build. Daniel looked at Sarah, seeing in her eyes the same love and commitment he felt in his own heart. "If your mama will have me," Daniel said carefully, "I'd be honored to be your daddy. All of yours." Sarah's answer came not in words but in a kiss that spoke of love tested by fire and proven unbreakable. Around them, the Montana landscape stretched toward horizons that no longer held threats but promises. The lonely cowboy had found his family. The desperate mother had found her sanctuary. The children had found a father who would protect them with his life. And in the aftermath of violence and terror, they had discovered that love really could conquer all. The battle for the Mitchell family was over. Their new life together was just beginning. 6 months after the siege at the Lazy W Ranch, Montana's spring had transformed the landscape into something that looked like hope made manifest. The bullet holes in the ranch house had been repaired, the broken windows replaced, and the scars of that terrible morning had faded into memory. But the changes to the people who lived there ran much deeper than cosmetic repairs. Daniel Whitmore stood in his front yard, watching Emma teach the twins how to properly approach Buttercup, the gentle mare who had become their favorite among the ranch horses. His left shoulder still ached when the weather changed, a permanent reminder of the morning he had nearly died protecting his family. But seeing the children laugh as they fed carrots to the patient horse, he considered it a small price to pay for the life he had gained. Sarah emerged from the house carrying Grace, now a healthy 10-month-old who had learned to walk and was testing the boundaries of her newfound mobility with the fearless determination of a child who had never known want. The baby who had once been too weak to cry properly was now a bundle of energy who kept her family constantly entertained with her adventures. "The cake is ready," Sarah announced, and the children abandoned their horse-feeding duties to race toward the house. Today marked the 6-month anniversary of what the local newspaper had dubbed the Battle of Lazy W. But for the Mitchell Whitmore family, it represented something more significant. The day they officially became a family, the adoption papers had been finalized the week before, with Judge Harrison presiding over a ceremony that was equal parts legal proceeding and celebration. Daniel Whitmore was now the legal father of Emma, Jacob, Joshua, and Grace Mitchell Whitmore. The hyphenated name had been Emma's suggestion, her way of honoring both the father who had saved them and the family identity they had built together. But the legal formalities were just paperwork confirming what had been true in their hearts. For months, Daniel had been their father in every way that mattered since the moment he chose to bring them home from that abandoned gas station. And Sarah had been his partner, his equal, his beloved since the first time she had stood up to defend her children with a rifle in her hands. The kitchen table, which had once hosted solitary meals for a lonely rancher, now overflowed with the chaos of family life. Emma, now 5 and preparing for kindergarten in the fall, had appointed herself official family historian, carefully documenting their adventures in a scrapbook that already contained dozens of photos. The twins, approaching their 4th birthday, were developing distinct personalities. Jacob, the thoughtful one who asked endless questions about ranch operations. Joshua, the adventurous one who saw every fence and tree as something to climb. As the family gathered around the table for their celebration meal, Daniel reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The man who had once spoken to no one but cattle and horses now found himself in constant conversation with 4 children who viewed him as the final authority on everything from why the sky was blue to whether it was possible to ride a chicken like a horse. "Tell us the story again," Joshua demanded as Sarah cut slices of chocolate cake, "about how you found us in the cold place." "You've heard that story 100 times, Sarah laughed, but Daniel was already settling into a storytelling voice. It had become a family tradition, this recounting of their origin story, though the version told to the children was carefully edited to remove the darker elements of their early struggles. "Once upon a time," Daniel began, "there was a cowboy who lived all alone on a ranch. He had horses and cattle for company, but no family to share his life with. And far away, there was a brave mama with 4 beautiful children who needed someone to help them find their way home." Emma, who knew the story by heart, picked up the narrative. "And then the cowboy was driving to town and he saw smoke from their little fire, and he knew they needed help." "That's right," Daniel continued. "So the cowboy said, 'Would you like to come home with me?' And the mama said, 'Yes, please,' and they all came to live on the ranch. And then we became a real family," Jacob added solemnly, "with a daddy who keeps us safe and teaches us about horses." The simplified version omitted the months of fear, the violence, the desperate struggle for survival that had brought them together. Those details would come later, when the children were old enough to understand the full scope of what they had overcome. For now it was enough that they understood they were loved, protected, and permanently home. After cake, the family scattered their various afternoon activities. Daniel worked with Emma on her reading, helping her sound out words from the children's books that now filled shelves previously occupied by veterinary manuals and ranch management guides. Sarah supervised the twins' art project, which appeared to involve covering themselves and most of the kitchen in finger paint, while creating masterpieces that would be proudly displayed on the refrigerator. Grace, having mastered walking, had moved on to the more advanced skill of opening cabinets and investigating their contents. Her latest discovery was the pot and pan cabinet, which provided endless entertainment as she experimented with the musical possibilities of metal cookware. The domestic chaos that would have terrified Daniel a year ago now felt like the natural soundtrack of a life well lived. The man who had once treasured solitude and predictability had discovered that love was worth any amount of noise and disruption. As evening approached, Daniel found Sarah on the front porch, watching the children play in the yard while Grace napped in her carrier beside the rocking chair. The setting sun painted the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson, and the peaceful scene looked like something from a postcard advertising the American dream. "Do you ever miss it?" Sarah asked quietly. "The quiet life you had before we turned everything upside down?" Daniel considered the question seriously. There were aspects of his former life that had been simpler, the predictable routines, the absence of worry about anyone but himself, the financial straightforwardness of supporting one person instead of 6. But simplicity wasn't the same as happiness. "I miss knowing where everything was," Daniel admitted. "I miss being able to eat cereal for dinner without someone asking for vegetables. I miss not having to check under the bed for monsters before anyone could go to sleep." Sarah's face fell slightly, and Daniel realized his answer had been misunderstood. "But Sarah," he continued, reaching for her hand, "I wouldn't trade a single day of this chaos for all the peaceful solitude in the world. You and the children didn't turn my life upside down, you turned it right side up. I was existing before. Now I'm living." The distinction was crucial. Daniel's life before the Mitchell family had been orderly and efficient, but it had lacked purpose beyond mere survival. Now every day brought new challenges and joys that gave meaning to his existence. Emma appeared at Daniel's side, having developed the uncanny ability that all children possess to materialize whenever adults are having important conversations. "Are you and Mama talking about grown-up things?" she asked with the diplomatic curiosity of someone who had learned to read adult moods. "We're talking about how lucky we are to have found each other," Daniel explained. "How grateful we are that our family found its way together." Emma nodded gravely, as if this confirmed something she had suspected. "Chuck says you and Mama are like puzzle pieces that fit together perfectly. And we kids are the border pieces that hold everything together." The insight from their neighbor was remarkably accurate. Daniel and Sarah had indeed found in each other the missing elements that completed their individual pictures of what life could be. But the children weren't just supporting pieces. They were the reason the puzzle mattered in the first place. That evening, after the children were bathed and stories were read, and the house had settled into the peaceful quiet that marked the end of another day, Daniel and Sarah sat together on their bed, planning for a future that stretched ahead of them like an open road. "Michael called today," Sarah mentioned, referring to Daniel's FBI brother who had become a regular visitor to the ranch. "He's being transferred to the Denver office permanently. He wants to know if we'll still have him for Christmas." "Of course," Daniel replied. Family had expanded beyond the 6 people who lived in the ranch house to include the network of friends and relatives who had rallied to protect them during their darkest hour. Chuck Hartley and his wife had become unofficial grandparents to the children. The Morrison brothers served as uncles who taught hunting and fishing skills. Dr. Martinez and Father Miguel provided medical care and spiritual guidance. The community that had once existed only on the periphery of Daniel's awareness had become central to their family's happiness. In saving the Mitchell family, Daniel had also saved himself from the isolation that had defined his adult life. "What about Emma's school?" Sarah continued. "The principal called to confirm her enrollment for fall kindergarten. Are we sure we want her to start? She's academically ready, but emotionally..." It was a conversation they had been having for weeks. Emma was intellectually prepared for formal education, but her maturity had been forced by circumstances that most children never faced. The question was whether school would provide beneficial socialization or unnecessary stress. "Let's ask her," Daniel suggested. "She's smart enough to have an opinion about her own education." The decision to involve Emma in choices about her own life was part of a larger philosophy that Daniel and Sarah had developed about raising children who had experienced trauma. They provided security and guidance, but they also respected the wisdom that came from surviving difficult experiences. "There's something else," Sarah said, her voice carrying a note that made Daniel's attention sharpen. Dr. Martinez confirmed it today. "I'm pregnant." The announcement hit Daniel like a physical force. Another child. A baby who would be born into safety and love, who would never know hunger or fear or abandonment. A child who would be theirs from the beginning, carrying DNA from both parents but loved no differently than the 4 children they had chosen to raise together. "How do you feel about it?" Daniel asked carefully, knowing that pregnancy could be complicated for someone who had experienced Sarah's struggles. Terrified, Sarah admitted honestly. And thrilled. And grateful that this baby will grow up knowing only love and security. Daniel pulled Sarah into his arms, marveling at the way life continued to unfold in directions he could never have anticipated. A year ago, he had been a solitary rancher with no prospects for family or children. Now he was a father of 4 about to become a father of 5, married to a woman who had taught him that love was worth any risk. The children will be excited, Daniel said, imagining Emma's reaction to becoming a big sister to yet another sibling. Emma already knows, Sarah confessed. She guessed before I did. She told me yesterday that the baby would be born in winter, and that it would be a boy who looks like you but has my stubborn streak. The idea of Emma's 5-year-old intuition, providing accurate predictions about their unborn child, was both amusing and oddly comforting. If anyone could foresee the future of their family, it would be the serious little girl who had appointed herself their guardian and guide. As summer turned toward autumn, the Lazy W Ranch prepared for new arrivals. Michael Whitmore announced his engagement to a fellow FBI agent, bringing the promise of more family gatherings. Chuck and Mary Hartley's daughter, returning from college, expressed interest in providing babysitting services for the growing Mitchell-Whitmore clan. Emma started kindergarten with the confidence of a child who knew she was loved and supported. The twins began preschool, where their teachers marveled at their cooperative play and advanced social skills. Grace continued her exploration of a world that held endless wonders and no threats. And Sarah's pregnancy progressed smoothly, monitored carefully by Dr. Martinez and celebrated enthusiastically by children, who took their roles as future big siblings very seriously. The baby arrived on a February morning that was cold but clear, born in the same hospital where Grace had received her first proper medical care 13 months earlier. Daniel William Mitchell Whitmore entered the world surrounded by family, his cries joining the chorus of voices that had made the ranch house a home. Emma, now 6 and fully established as the family authority on all matters related to child rearing, took one look at her new brother and pronounced him perfect. The twins, fascinated by the tiny person who would eventually become their playmate, stood guard over the bassinet with protective seriousness. Grace, now a walk-in toddler, patted the baby's head with gentle curiosity. "He looks like Daniel," Sarah observed, though the baby looked mostly like all newborns, red and wrinkled, and thoroughly unimpressed with his new surroundings. "He has your determination," Daniel replied, watching his son's vigorous protests about being removed from his warm, comfortable previous residence. As they prepared to leave the hospital and return to the ranch with their newest family member, Daniel reflected on the transformation that had brought them to this moment. 2 years ago, he had been a lonely man marking time in an empty house. Now he was a husband and father returning home with his wife and newborn son, to a house full of children who would greet their arrival with joy and celebration. The abandoned gas station where he had first encountered the Mitchell family had been demolished months ago, replaced by a small park with a playground and picnic tables. Sometimes Daniel drove past the site, remembering the desperate family he had found there and marveling at the journey that had brought them all to this place of happiness and security. Emma, riding home from the hospital in the front seat beside Daniel, turned to look at her sleeping baby brother in his car seat. "Are we done now?" she asked with the practical curiosity that characterized her approach to family planning. "Is our family finished?" Daniel glanced at Sarah, who was smiling despite her exhaustion. They had never discussed specific numbers when it came to children, had simply accepted each new addition as a gift to be treasured. "What do you think?" Daniel asked Emma. "Do we have enough family now?" Emma considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important decisions. "I think we have exactly the right amount," she concluded. "But if more people need a family like we needed one, we could probably fit a few more." The answer perfectly captured the spirit that had brought them together and sustained them through every challenge. They were a family built not by biology but by choice, not by chance but by love. And if other lost souls needed sanctuary, the Lazy W Ranch would always have room for one more dot as they turned into their driveway, past the gate that bore the sign reading, "The Mitchell Whitmore Ranch Est, 2024. Daniel saw the life he had never dared to dream stretching ahead of them. Children growing up strong and confident. Family dinners filled with laughter and conversation. Birthdays and holidays and graduations and weddings and grandchildren who would carry their story forward. Into the future, the lonely cowboy had found his family. The desperate mother had found her forever home. The children had found a father who would never leave them. And together, they had proved that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the simple act of one person choosing to help another in their darkest hour. The battle for the Mitchell family was over. Their happily ever after had just begun. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.